Yes, I will share with you the highlights of the Games Monitor 2022 report, which will be available later this year. Before I start, who has read the Games Monitor 2018? Wow, impressive. Good. As a reminder for those of you who have read it, and also for the people who haven't been reading the report before, some key points to take into consideration before I dive into the numbers. So it's actually the fourth time we've been able to do the Games Monitor research. We've had editions reporting the numbers for 2012, 2015, 2018, and this report shows the numbers for 2021. It is good to keep in mind that the numbers I use are for the companies that are part of the core of the Dutch games industry. So everybody who's involved in one of the steps in developing a game and getting it ready for a market. That means we don't include shops where you can buy physical games. It also means we don't include companies where games is not their core activity. So we know that there are, for instance, marketing and digital agencies who develop games as part of their portfolio for clients. But it's just one of the things they do. We don't count them as a game company. We also know that there are larger organizations and companies who develop games in-house. For instance, the military, where a lot of things are developed to train the personnel. We don't count them as a game company. So that's something to keep in mind. There is actually a much larger group of companies who does work with games, but not all of that is included in these numbers. So what have we done? We have a database of game companies that is updated regularly. We have held a survey earlier this year. Almost 200 people responded, so for everybody here in the room who did that, thank you very much. That's very helpful. It's necessary to get a complete overview of the industry. I've held some interviews, conversations with several people in the field. And I work together with NEO Observatory for the data and the link with national databases. And now onto the main facts and figures. The Dutch games industry has grown quite a lot the last 3 years. So we've grown from 575 companies to 630 by the end of 2021. These companies together grew the number of employees from 3,850 to 4,560. And the total revenue combined for 2021 was between 420 and 440 million. I will dive into these numbers a little bit further after this slide. Now I want to spend a little bit of time on the educational part because I don't come back to it in the rest of my presentation. So the number of graduates for the last year has decreased somewhat compared to earlier editions of the Games Monitor. And there are actually two main factors for that. One of them is that several schools, mainly in the vocational education, so MBO for the Dutch people, have reorganized their educational programs, and where they first had specific game developer programs, it's now part of a broader curriculum, for instance, software developer. So we know that they do still some things with games, and some people are interested in developing games, but we don't count them as a full game educational program anymore. And the second thing is that due to the COVID pandemic and all the struggles it meant for students, is that some schools saw a little bit of slowing down of the graduation processes for some of the students, because it takes just a little bit longer for them to finish internships, thesis and such. So more about education in the full report, but that's what I wanted to share with you today. this is actually one of my favorite overviews for this presentation. What this really shows is the way in which the Dutch games industry has been developing in the past 10 years. So as I mentioned, we've done the report for the 4th time now, and what you saw is in the first and the second edition of the report, so roughly between 2012 and 2015, you saw mainly a growth in the number of companies. The second and the third edition, between 2015 and 2018, you saw mostly a growth in the number of jobs. And now in this edition, we see that there's still a growth in the number of jobs, but the largest growth can be found in the turnover, and actually quite a large one with, on average, almost 18% per year for the last 3 years. So the Dutch games industry has really grown a lot in terms of revenue. And if you compare it with the Newzoo numbers, for instance, about the total spend, consumer spend on games, where there was a bit of a slowdown after the first pandemic hype, where everybody started gaming a lot more, we've continued to grow as the Dutch games industry. So it's, yeah, quite a nice number, I think. So where did this growth take place? Which part of the industry did particularly well? I've grouped the total amount of employees per size of the company. And what you see in this graph is that especially the companies with more than 50 employees, and especially the group of between 50 and 100 employees, has more than doubled in size. The growth is really taking place in larger companies, making it more a sustainable growth than when you just grow in the number of companies. For this edition, I've also been able to collect data about the original founding dates of all game companies. And we've split them up in brackets of 3 years. And what this one shows is that the large number of companies is not in the very early stage startups, between the companies less than 3 years old, but mostly in the 4 to 6 and the 7 to 9 years, which are companies who have already developed at least one game. And for the 7 to 9-year-olds, at least more than 2 games, roughly, you could say. So these companies have really shown resilience in their existence and have proven to themselves that they can exist as a company, making it a more maturing of the industry. And because of we are developing as an industry, you slowly see more companies in the older age groups as well. Where are those people working then? The number of employees is mapped based on a statistical region, which we call core regions. That's around 40 regions for the entire Netherlands, which is used for national databases and European ones. And then you see that the Greater Amsterdam region, which includes Amsterdam and Schiphol, for instance, is by far the largest hub in terms of employees. Almost a third of the employees work in the Greater Amsterdam region. And then Utrecht is the second region, so it's the Utrecht region, which is the entire province basically. And one of the things that I saw in the numbers is that for the Utrecht region specifically, there is the highest number also of employees in the applied games company. It's a little less than half of the employees in the Dutch region, in the Utrecht region, is working in applied game companies. Then we use the survey as well in all our data. So we've asked the companies to fill out what their turnover was in 2021. We've actually, I've grouped it together that the largest category is more than 1 million turnover in 2021. to make it comparable to earlier editions, but we do have more detail in the larger category. But you really see that that's where the most growth was, in the companies that have more than 1 million in revenues. And that especially the category with less than 50K in revenues has decreased. So you see that the entire industry as a whole is sort of moving upwards, and that there's more maturity in the amount of revenue they get per employee. We've asked companies whether they wanted to grow, or if they have ambitions for growth, and how they want to fund that. Obviously, a lot of companies say, yes, we want to grow, and they will do it basically with their own means, the earnings they get from their games. And often it's a combination of own means and different types of external funding. So what's particularly interesting in these numbers is that we see the interest for private investments, so both angel and venture capital investments, is slowly rising during the different Games Monitor reports. And this year we've added the private loan as a type of funding by which we meant, for instance, the mid-game fund, which was started in 2021 by several industry veterans. So that's really a type of investment that companies are interested in. And one other thing is that you see that crowdfunding is becoming less popular. And I think there are two reasons for that. One, it's more difficult to get enough funding through crowdfunding. And the other one is that the amount of money you can get through a crowdfunding campaign is also limited. If I combine that with the required investment amount for what companies are, so that the ones who do want to grow with the help of external funding, it's only 8% who's looking for a small amount of money. So that's where crowdfunding is an option. But for the other categories, most of it is crowdfunding is way too limited in means. So also you see that of the companies who want to grow and use external funding, 25% is interested in an amount of more than 1 million euros, which connects with the fact that they are more interested in venture capital and angel investors. And we also saw that back in the type of investment that companies are interested in. So I asked them whether they were interested in equity. So that's where an external investor takes part of your, has a share in your company, versus project funding, where it's only a deal you make for that specific game you're developing at that time, or a combination. And you see that there's a slowly companies are more interested in equity or a combination of project funding and equity. And well, this the total amount is 100, so that's why you see that project funding is decreasing, because if one category becomes more popular, then the other one will decrease. And we have seen several large investments and mergers and acquisitions in the past 3 years. Just to name a few, Vertigo has been acquired by Koch Media, which is part of the Embracer Group. Vertigo then acquired Forcefield, which is now continuing on as Vertigo Amsterdam. Nixus in Utrecht was acquired by Sony and is now part of the PlayStation family. Game Basics was acquired by Miniclip. Lucky Cat got a deal with Fragbite from Sweden. And also in the applied games category, we saw investments coming in. For instance, Tover got an investment from Carmine Capital, which allows them to grow more internationally and especially in Northern America. To continue on a little bit on applied games, so always a topic where we spend a chapter on in the Games Monitor research, because it's one of the things the Dutch games industry is well, internationally known for. We asked them which sectors they are in which sectors their clients operate, and we also made a division in the size of the projects they do. And obviously you see that the health games sector is where the largest amount of projects is, but also where the largest amount of projects larger than 100,000 euros is. And we've seen also developments in that part the last 3 years, that where a couple of years ago there were a lot of pilot projects, and now we see them really being applied in the healthcare sector. For instance, in VR, but also other applied games for training of surgeons, for instance, but also for treating patients in rehabilitation or in cognitive skills. So that's really developing. And the second one is the educational sector, where there's somewhat more smaller projects. And in general, we've seen, of course, also in the COVID impact report we did at the beginning of 2021, that the applied games sector was affected by the COVID pandemic. It's slowly getting back on its feet. They still exist, they've grown, and there are some really interesting developments going on at the moment. Then on to some of the things for entertainment game companies. So Niels, this one was the one you were interested in, I think. So we've asked them which game engines companies are using. They could give multiple answers, so we saw that companies are using more than one engine, and that number has grown. But what's most apparent in these numbers is that the Unreal Engine is used far more than a couple of years ago. We've also asked for which platforms entertainment companies develop their games, and this is also a pretty specific character for the Dutch games industry, is that there's a lot of games developed for PC. And I didn't put in that slide, but it also we can see it in the distribution channels they use, because Steam is by far the most used channel for selling the games. Also, we see here that multiple platforms are used, and that mobile has grown as well, and it's sort of equally divided, or same amount of companies who develop for iOS or Android. So there's no large difference in that. And then the focus on PCs and Steam combines also with how game developers monetize their games, where premium has risen a lot. Newzoo uses the term hybrid monetization strategy, so that's something we see reflected in these numbers as well. Most companies are using several monetization strategies to sell their games, but still premium is by far the largest, and we see that the in-game advertising hasn't. Is almost the same amount of companies who use that as 3 years ago. I think it has to do also with the European laws that have been they're in place now about privacy, and it's not so easy to track your players anymore. So customized advertising campaigns are way harder to realize, which makes your advertising less, less interesting. So it is, on the one hand, there's an international reason why it hasn't developed further. And the other one is that the character of what Dutch game companies develop. So this year we also added the NFT category that didn't exist 3 years ago. So there's a number of companies who develop games with NFT options in them. And that has been a subject which has been thoroughly discussed in the Dutch games industry Slack in the past year. So we've added a question about it in the survey, how companies think about NFTs in games. A large percentage, 45%, says I am against the use of NFTs in games. And some people added comments in the survey where they stated that it's a scam, it's a Ponzi scheme, it should be forbidden. So they were really outspoken in their opinions about NFTs. There is a group of, that is really seeing possibilities in it, which are using it in the games. So it's the top two answers. And there's a large group who's still undecided. Who, for instance, gave an answer like, yeah, I see there are technical or technological possibilities, but the way it is used now is not feasible in the long run, but I'm really interested to see what it will be like in a number of years. And another topic which has been discussed a lot, which I also was talking about with Sasha a while ago, is the diversity and inclusion topic. So we've also asked companies how it is part of their company policies. So we do see that there's quite a lot of companies, you could give more than one answer here as well, who do have policies around diversity and inclusion, whether it's in their both in the game design or in the audience they target, and in their recruitment and selection processes. And you see that the number of companies who takes it into account in the salary conditions is much lower, and I think that has to do with awareness. What does it mean to have salary discussions? If you think about diversity and inclusivity, it's being open, for instance, about your salaries, or having clearly defined salary scales, that it's clear for the employees how they can develop. But also to be aware of the fact that some groups of employees are pretty modest in what they ask in their salary conditions. And being aware of that fact means that you take it into account in your policies. Obviously, there's a group who doesn't do a lot about it yet. And what I found interesting in the other categories is that there's, if you look at freelancers, you see both sides of the scale. So you see people who say, yeah, I'm a freelancer, it doesn't really apply to me because I don't have employees, to somebody who says, yes, it does matter for me as a freelancer as well, because I take it into consideration if I think about which clients I like to work for. And if it's a company that is actively promoting or not doing anything against racism or sexism, then I don't want to work for that client. So I found that really interesting to see both sides of the medal. So to wrap it up, the Dutch games industry is growing, did very well the last 3 years, and we saw several indicators that the Dutch games industry is on the road to maturity. So I presented the highlights, and we're still working on the reports. They will be available later this year. We will make a full version which has the cover with Forbidden West full size. And then we also make a fact sheet, which is the other one. So keep an eye on our social media and etc. if you are interested to download them or to read them. So a thank you to all the partners, specifically Dutch Games Association and Video Game Federation Netherlands, and the partners who made the Games Monitor possible.
Thank you, Christel. Thank you. We do have time for a couple of quick questions. And for the questions, we have this fun throw-around microphone. Keep in mind, if you get this microphone, that you talk into it directly. Are there any questions for Christel at this time? Anyone?
If not, we'll go drink a cup of tea.
Well, I do have a question. What do you think is the most interesting thing in this year's monitor that you didn't expect to see such a growth or decline in?
Yeah, what I said earlier, that I really like the first the companies, then the jobs, and now the turnover that is showing the growth. That's really what I'm like most about this edition. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes? I'm sorry if my aim is bad.
Okay.
A slight clarification, because with everything like it's a current state, so that's very clear. The graduates, is that annual graduates, or is that that happened over the course of the past 3 years, or is that the graduates from 2021?
2021.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, question right behind.
Yes, hi. Thank you for your introduction and just for figures and so on. Have you done research about not on just turnover, but actually about EBITDA or something like that, just about profits of the companies? Because turnover, it's turnover. Profits expecting show what the expenses, how that growth, just in finance lens.
So if I understand correctly, you're asking why we only used revenues or turnover and not
as
profit?
I understand, you're just using the terms of turnover.
Yeah.
But through financial terms, have you just asked about like EBITDA? Has it declined or just it's rising?
No, we didn't ask about that. We've asked about profits in earlier versions, but we found out that those answers were not really useful for our research, because turnover is a hard number.
I see.
And profit is what you make of it, because a lot of it is reinvested in the company. So not people don't report it as profit. And you want to you have your profits as low as possible before taxes. That's why we didn't ask about profits this time.
I see. Okay.
Oh.
Any Richie? I'll just hand this one to you.
Hi, Christel. Quick question about the job number. Is there anything you can say about the difference in that number between full-time employees versus contractors and how that relates?
You mean as in freelancers?
Yeah, so if you look
this
at...
is actually number of employees working for the companies. And in the company list, there are freelancers. You, for instance.
Right.
So you count as a one-person company. But we did ask if about freelancers as well. And it will be reported in the full report. We'll come back in the full report.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned, yes.